Hello, this is the Creating NPCs panel. I think that this is going to be really interesting because creating NPCs is something that takes place in so many different disciplines that there's going to be a lot of interesting thought as we compare how the process of NPC creation and development differs between the different industries and media that we're involved in. So just to get started, I'd like to ask everybody to give a brief introduction for themselves. Let's start at the bottom because everyone else seems to start at the top. So Quiana, go ahead and give us a 1-minute introduction of your background and how you relate to NPC creation.
Okay, perfect. So as you said, my name is Quiana, and I work at a space simulator. So it's like LARPing and D&D on steroids, I guess. And it's at a school, so all the kids come into the little simulator and they get to be on a space bridge like in Star Trek. And then my job is to sit behind the microphone and I get to progress the story forward, and I get to be like the computer and all the different characters they interact with. I have a voice changer back there. I also run an unholy amount of D&D campaigns, and I'm a writer as well. So that's where I'm coming from here. I love characters and character creation and live role-playing formats. It's my favorite thing.
Sounds like every DM's dream job. Thank you.
It's amazing.
Dylan.
Hi, my name is Dylan Parker. I operate Chapter 1 Editing, a freelance both editing and sensitivity reading service. I'm also the co-host on the Puckle Podcast, a long-running Pokemon podcast, including our spin-off show, Puckle PTU, where we have taken a live-action role-play, well, not live-action, I'm just very tired, a role-play angle to Pokemon and using the PTU system. It's a very dynamic one. I've been a DM for many years, and I do a lot of developmental edits for scripts. So it's a lot of character work and consistency. And it's all just a lot of fun on my end.
Thank you so much. That sounds interesting. I'm going to have to message you about that later. Ben, go ahead. What's your background?
So I am a storyteller and voice actor. And so there's a lot of creating various characters in all the different things that I do. And a lot of it needs to be able to differentiate really quickly between who I'm talking about and who's doing what. And so there's just a lot of practice there. So
cool. That's exciting. So from what I'm gathering right now, we've got one person who's role playing, another person who's sort of more writing, and one person who's all about NPC portrayal, which is really exciting and a insight I didn't think that we'd have. I noticed that there's nobody covering video games. Maybe that would have been the role of the fifth panelist that we were going to have, who isn't here yet. My background is that I am the director and design lead of Space Heater Games, which is a small indie studio that just released their first video game 9 days ago today. It's called Final Winter. It's really exciting. We're psyched about it. Normally, moderators are not supposed to interject their opinions and stuff like that. If you guys are interested, I could provide a insight into NPC creation and the roles of NPCs in video games as well, but only if it's okay with you, because again, I'm the moderator, I'm not a panelist. Is that something that you would be okay with?
Something I want to learn more about personally, so yeah.
Yeah, and I think it'd be good to have that perspective. So
cool. If you're okay with it, then the audience is probably okay with it too. And if there are riots going on in the chat right now, let me know and I'll shut up and back off. So with that, thank you for the introductions. Let's start off with the first seed question. What makes an NPC memorable, and why would you want that? Is there somebody who would like to start us off on that?
I can. The thing that in my experience, has made an NPC memorable is some angle of engagement that the players or participants can take. It's something that makes them interested in learning more, interested in discussing. It's a sort of engagement hook. That can be a silly accent that they absolutely love to make you do. That can be something like a strong character resonance that someone has to their character. But I think that by and large, they feel like they have a reason to interact, permission, and they want to see that character come out.
I really like that. Especially like in the performance side, having that meaningful interactions with the player characters is so important. Something more about like when you're creating those characters initially, or even like on the fly. My husband and I were kind of talking about this last night, and we noticed that like that Fire Emblem characters specifically seem to follow this like trend, and they have a virtue, a flaw, and a quirk, and one of them is secret. And so like along with them interacting well with the player characters in those sort of ways, having those like different layers that the characters can uncover and discover about that character can like really enhance the experience and make it more interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the big things is they've got to feel like a separate person in order to get that interactivity. They've got to feel like they're not just there to serve the player's story, whether it's tabletop or video game. Like, yeah, they can help along, but they've got to have their own motivations. They've got their own wants. They've got their own quirks, and it's not just a bland, here's a quest.
Yeah, spear carrier is the use in stage.
Interesting.
Guy comes in with a spear and he's like, all right, this is the news. And then he leaves.
Yeah.
I know that in video games you are in some ways limited because even in very choice-heavy mediums such as visual novels, the opportunity that you have to interact with characters is limited to what you pre-program in, as opposed to a tabletop setting where the player characters can just do whatever they want. So in some ways you need to pre-plan which NPCs you expect will be memorable and try to program enough interaction around them that that you can really do things such as highlight that virtue or that flaw or that quirk. And if you accidentally pick the wrong characters and you pick the less interesting ones, then you can get in trouble because people will want to explore the wrong story. And so a lot of it has to do with, I guess, pre-GMing, like knowing your target audience well enough to know what they're going to look into before you can really do the work of making an NPC memorable. So go ahead.
A great example of that actually was, of all things, it's in Fire Emblem. In the most recent game, there was a character who was the guard. And he was just exactly. He was a no-name character, but there was just enough characterization there that the players latched on over some of the major characters. They did a popularity poll on one of their spin-offs just a couple weeks ago, and the guard beat out major characters that had entire games and plot lines. That was who they wanted added to their spin-off, and I mean, you can say that it's a really good NPC design and it was memorable, but I would say that there was a lot of time that was spent on other things that kind of gets glossed over in a way. And I don't think it was bad to have a memorable NPC, but sometimes if you have the attention drawn away from the main focus, you can end up derailing things. And so there's a balance.
So let's talk about that. There's this one question that says, how do you prevent an NPC from taking over the story? And I guess there's an ancillary question here. Do you care if the NPC takes over the story?
Well, sometimes you really don't want the NPC to take over the story, and it can be really detrimental. And I found that like, because Do your players, like when you DM campaigns, do they just like adopt all the NPCs and soon you have like this like little army that's just marching forward and like this it's like great, but it's awful because you're managing so many NPCs because they're just in love with all of them. And usually we have to do something like send all the NPCs off on their own adventures and they can like kind of keep in contact with them occasionally with letters, or sometimes the bad guy will capture all of the NPCs and hold them and be like, well, you can't get them back until you finish my quest. And like that's what, yeah, those are some tips to like keep the importance of those NPCs while still keeping like the game moving forward.
Well, and I think that right there is a great illustration of another reason why you want to have your NPCs have their own motivation. They should have something that they're working towards. If they are just an offshoot of the characters, the players, then it's easy for them to just go along. But even if the players are wanting to adopt an NPC, if they've got something else that they're wanting to go do, then it's an easy exit for them. And it still leaves them as a memorable, that they leaves them with that, oh, we loved that character, we're so glad we had them, but now they're gone, and we can just remember them now, you know?
In my experience, if a character starts overriding the plot, I am very guilty of going, okay, what other characters did I have in the future that are just now this person? So, you know, they really, an example of in a campaign that I played, took years to go through. There was a character who's supposed to just be a one-off bit gag, but for reasons, it made sense to replace a ancillary character who was going to show up much later, just to bring the character back. They had had such a memorable encounter. And it didn't, because I had already figured out what this other person was going to do, slotting someone else in and tweaking motivations prevented it from being just a rampant cancer growth, because there was already a defined role that I could slot someone in and they could do it. I see this happening in stories that I edit, where if there's a breakout character, a recommendation that I've given is, you know, people really like this. Just this other character is extraneous. Just strip them and give their role over, and you're gonna have a higher level of engagement.
Yeah, and
that's excellent.
I think that is great. That also gives them more importance to the characters themselves. It presents them in another context that allows the players to interact and grow and care about them more.
I think this kind of brings, from a video game perspective, it goes back to the first question that I mentioned, which is what makes an NPC memorable and why is that important, or when would you do that? It's like, I think everyone just took it as a given that, yeah, memorable NPCs are important. Like, that's what we want to shoot for, is memorable NPCs. But in video games, you have an amount of cognitive load that each NPC adds to a story and to the player's head. And the more memorable NPCs you have, the more likely you are to have something like the guard in Fire Emblem, where people latch on to the wrong things. There are times in video game design where you don't want to make NPC memorables. You don't want every shopkeeper and arena guard and every person to have a backstory. The Dragon Quest series does it pretty well, where usually you'll get like 1 or 2 lines of characterization, like, oh, this shopkeeper is sick, or this shopkeeper is trying to sell stuff for her daughter, or something like that. But beyond that, you don't get conversation trees or anything with the random NPCs, and that lowers the cognitive load and makes it so that you can have more spotlight time for the NPCs that you do want to make memorable. Have you guys ever changed the point of view character in a story when you find that an NPC is more interesting than the original point of view? Now, this is tough because I feel as though this question was not designed for tabletop gaming, because you can't exactly say, well, you seem to be more interested in this NPC than your own character. Would you like to switch? But are there times where you have needed to change a story around so that the NPC was the PC and vice versa?
So
I have not. Go ahead.
ahead.
I have not done this. I have worked with clients in my editing work where I have said that their main characters are flat, or that there are other more interesting characters. But by and large, I don't tend to want to shift the focus. Oftentimes, that can just skew the intention. I think more realistically, what I will say is, hey, maybe you can steal some of these characterizations, or just more often, you just need to add some defining characteristics to your POV. I think that desire is less, oh, this is a great NPC, and more that you have a POV that is inappropriate for your story.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. Anybody else?
I've had a couple times where I've been doing a campaign and like I had a NPC that I was really attached to that was basically the DM character, but it just got so bogged down and we just had to remove him, even though like I really loved this character a lot. And I'd started out the campaign as like a player character. And so when I graduated to DM when the other DM left, like we had to gently find ways to remove him from the story. And we ended up having him join the bad guys side eventually because like we were like, how could we make him like more interesting and relevant and also show that I don't know. And so we did that. And we're going to be bringing him back later, so don't tell them. But like it's
hoping your friends aren't that supportive.
They aren't showing up to your panels or anything, yeah.
Yeah, that brings up a good point of like just always recontextualizing. If somebody is taking over the narrative, recontextualize why they're taking it over. If scaling it back and working on those other things doesn't work, that changing it up and making them more an obstacle, because I mean, let's be fair, villains are very charismatic and always very memorable. And as you move people over to that villain side, is it BioShock? Tons of games do it. Where you've got somebody that's been along for the ride the whole time, and then all of a sudden they're a villain, and it's like, oh, okay, and it just changes everything that you've seen before, and now it's a more interesting story and engaging.
Yeah. So, especially like that can add for some interesting reversals and plot twists and things like that. So let's talk a little bit about NPC portrayal. Let's say that you have created an NPC with an interesting backstory, flaws, quirks, strengths, maybe even a character growth arc, stuff like that. Or you're being given that if you are, for instance, a voice actor. And at this point, it comes time to communicate that to the player, whether that comes through a text medium like dialogue in video games, or whether that comes to acting that person out as in a voice actor or a DM. What techniques or tricks do you use in order to communicate the interest and complexity of an NPC to the players?
So this is my whole job. So I'm really excited you asked this question because I'm not looking at the kids in my job. It's all voice work. And I have to make sure that every single character is completely distinct and unique from each other. So like if you have one character who's like talking like this and she's like, hi, I'm Trisha. I usually use a great axe, but I decided to try out a mace today. And then you also have someone else who talks like this and is very slow with their words. And even though it's very clearly like the same person who's talking, you can clearly distinguish the different characters. And so I would highly recommend going to YouTube and just listening to people speak in like random accents that they are native to. I got my Scottish accent by like listening to David Tennant's portrayal of Scrooge McDuck, and now I have a pretty decent Scottish accent. And it's great. And when you have those variety of accents and voice patterns, then people don't notice, even if you can't shift your voice higher or lower. It's really nice shorthand. So
yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of things you can do without changing your voice a lot. I mean, we look at some of the great voice actors, Mel Blanc, he 1,000 voices, whatever. But there are a lot of great voice actors that sound mostly the same, except they're varying their word choices, their cadence, their accent a little bit, and just a lot of small changes makes a big difference. And one of, especially for beginners, one of the big things that I look at is, choose somebody that you want your character to sound like, and try to imitate that. And even if you do it badly, it's still a separate character. And it's a character that you can go back to easily and make it recognizable every single time, because you may be doing it badly, but you're doing it badly at the same time, the same way.
Outside of voice work, if you need to sell specific character, whether it be in dialogue, particularly in hard-hitting moments, establishing speech patterns, and I do not mean phonetic accents, please do not subject me to those. But establishing like how a character makes reference, what kinds of speech they use. Sometimes the less that you have to go on, the more heavy-handed you have to be sometimes. And having a character talk like, before I was this, now I'm. If you don't really have a lot of page space and you have to say to not show, you have to do what you have to do. But a lot of it is going to come down to subtly or not so subtly reminding people of what came before, who this person is, and why these important moments change. What about this defines a change? Why is this the moment that we're supposed to remember? The more axes you have, if you have facial performance, fantastic, you can do that. If you have voice, great. If you just have text, gotta go with word choice. That's just your only lever.
Well, and I'll even add, like, above and beyond just facial, like if you've got your body as a storyteller, I use my body a lot. Hunch down for, this old woman, various different, like, just the way you're holding your body, it signals. Choose something big. If you're in person, choose something big and hit on it really well, and that signals to your audience that this is this person.
Yeah, and in writing, especially if you don't have that visual medium or that like auditory medium, something you can do is you can like act out how you think that character would do that scene. Because I've noticed that my writing tends to be like all the characters will usually sound exactly the same unless I do something different. So because I'm able to make characters sound differently when I'm acting, I'll often act out a scene like as that character, like include the movements that they would do, and then I'll translate that to the page, and it will be like completely different than if I had just like sat down and typed it out. So that's another trick you can use if you don't have the visual or auditory medium. But if you do have like a visual medium, there's always the silhouette test. And that's super, super important. And the concept is that like if you have a bunch of characters lined up together and all you see is their silhouette, you can still tell them perfectly apart. So
this is especially important in video game design. I was going to say that, like, we're talking about body acting, facial expressions, and stuff like that. Having an excellent art team is really important in video game design because it allows you to differentiate people and to communicate emotion through facial expressions and things like that. Even small teams like Stardew Valley, which had a team of, I think, one person. If you look at the art that person produced. Like, they reworked this one character's, Alex's, face over and over and over again until it was until the guy learned how to do pixel art himself. You're talking about the silhouette test. It's interesting. There's this one leak from Riot Games, the people who made League of Legends, and they had released a teaser saying that their next champion was going to be like a druid type person and with nature powers and stuff like that. And then suddenly there was a leak where they showed this character that was a druid and had nature powers. And I looked at it and I immediately said, nope, that's a fake leak. And the reason is because his silhouette, he was like this robed druid with a staff, and he looked like, if you were to do the silhouette test, he would have looked exactly like another character. He would have looked exactly like Swain. And I'm like, this has got to be a fake, because Riot would not do this. And then sure enough, when they released the next character, he was Ivern. He was this really tall, lanky, candy cane type person. And it was the silhouette test was so important that you could immediately tell, no, this is not the direction that they're going to go. And that sort of leads into how to make NPCs memorable. Oftentimes, it can come down to the visuals. It can come down to whether or not they look or sound or act differently than other characters. So sort of the next question that I have is, how do you go to players into interacting with the NPCs that you want them to? I think that we've probably all had times where we've got this NPC that we want the characters to interact with, and the players, for whatever reason, just tend to ignore them. And this happens both in normal media and even in video games. It's like, oh, well, either this person didn't seem interesting, or I thought this person was just a random villager, or something like that. How do we get the players to interact with the interesting NPCs?
I'll let you go first. Okay. This is something I have to do with all the time, because in the spaceships, you have a kid who's like flying, who's the pilot, right? And he's at the helm, and he's got his little joystick, and he's zooming around through the 3D environment. And we need them to go investigate the border of Earth space, which is in this direction. But the kid is determined to go to the moon, which is in this direction. And it's like, no. We have nothing there. There's nothing there for you. It is a set piece. And luckily in our software, we have an ability where we can like give course guidance, which is basically a set of purple lines that just veers them over. And even if we don't say anything and give any like, hey, you need to go over this way, they'll naturally follow those purple lines, because they're like, oh, something is over here. I'm just going to follow it. And there are different ways to do that in different mediums, especially if you have different characters or other NPCs. Whenever they go and interact with them, they're always referencing this crazy person who lives in a hut, and they're trying to hire them to go take care of crazy person who lives in the hut, or they're really mad about their chicken who went missing, and they're pretty sure the crazy person in the hut did it, or someone who's like, maybe the person is in the hut isn't that bad, and the other and another NPC is like, well, that person in the hut, like, I think it would be really neat to visit them, but I can't figure out how to get through the forest. And every single thing that they interact with points towards that character, that where the story is.
Does that ever feel railroady?
It can, but sometimes, and it depends on like whether or not you want to be railroady, because sometimes that is what you need. Like, but if you have a more open setting, like you can just have the other things just be boring except for the person in the hut, and just have everything else be boring. So they can do whatever they want. There's just nothing exciting. They're gonna, like, if they're really determined to talk to that weird little goblin in the bar, he's just going to enlist them to pull weeds from his garden for 4 hours, and they're not gonna do that. They're gonna find something more fun to do. So
making uninteresting and unmemorable NPCs. Okay, go ahead.
In my experience, there's another trick that you can pull, which is imagine there's door A and door B. Both of them go to room A.
That's a good trick.
but they will never go back and see where the other goes. And if they do, it's just like, oh, it's a janitor's closet or whatever. But it's that on another level. I have run very open campaigns that absolutely needed specific set piece moments to happen. So I just wrote down, they get to a town and this happens. Whatever town it was did not matter, because that town was magically where they needed to be for these set pieces to happen. And I didn't need them to go to talk to the person in the hut necessarily, because when they came in, everything was on fire and heroism kicks in. So sometimes you just need to, you don't give them other options, but not in the way that, not in the fake way that there's only one thing and you can do it, but in the way of, whatever you do, I'm just going to, you're clicking the dialogue box, but the tree is the same. This gonna happen. And as long as they never look at it, and as long as you do it sparingly, they will never know. Because it'll just feel like the story is following them and that they were following into plot hooks. Because they don't see all of the branches going right back to the same spot.
That's such an advantage that you guys have over video games, because you can't really do that in video games because the players will feel cheated, because they come to an interesting dialogue tree, they'll save, and then they'll explore other branches and they'll feel cheated if all of the branches reconvene at the same place, because by giving them the branches, you're giving them the illusion of choice, right? Which is exactly what you're going for, is that the players don't realize they're being railroaded. They think they've got agency, but no matter what town they go to, it's on fire, and only the guy in the hut can put it out or whatever, right? But in video games, wikis destroy that illusion of choice, because if somebody is like, I love this game so much that I'm going to plot out all of the dialogue trees and put them up on this wiki, they're very quickly going to stop saying that this is their favorite game, because they'll feel so cheated. There is this one game I played where you needed to get something and you knew that it was in a chest in the dungeon, but the programmers had created it so that it was always in the last chest that you looked in. And so that you would have to traverse the entire dungeon. You couldn't just, no matter how many times you've played the game, you couldn't just shoot to where the key was in the chest. You'd have to do all of it. And man, that feels bad as a player. Go ahead. Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I think that a lot of times is where Quiana was talking about signposting in as many ways as you can. One of the first things, like in video games, the silhouette test. A silhouette that stands out is going to be one that the players go talk to. A silhouette that just blends in and is the same as all the other people, they're probably going to just pass that up. And so just as many signposts as you can. And you can make them as obvious or not as you want, depending on what type of gameplay you think your players want. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you. So I wanted to leave about 10 minutes for questions, and I wanted to leave about 5 minutes for outros, advertising your books, games, whatever, stuff like that. So that means 15 minutes tacked on the end, which starts about now. So if we could have the volunteer read us some questions from the audience.
Yes, the first one is from James. How do you guide your players not to kill important NPCs?
Saw this in the chat, and my answer was just necromancy, but...
I'll reuse the NPC, literally! The boring answer is talk to your players about the social contract of the game. That you're trying to tell them a fun story that they're going to get to engage with, but that only works if they participate. It's boring, but it's functional.
And if you feel adventurous, going about it in a way of, breaking the social contract has consequences. And so if you're willing to do that extra work, it is a lot of extra work, but if characters are just going to be killing important NPCs. A great side quest of them now trying to evade the law. You know, that's hopefully they will think twice about it in the future.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, also, like, just making the NPCs that you want to stay alive like 12 levels above like
kill 'em anyway.
player characters. Then you give them a posse that's there where they're like, it's the NPC, and then there are 5 bodyguards that are also 12 levels above the NPCs. Sometimes they still do it, and you're like, but I really liked what Dylan was talking about earlier, where you can like just find another character that was going to fill that role that other character was going to provide.
I will very often let them do it once and then bring it up to the PCs over and over again if that character was meant to fulfill a role later. It's like, oh, if only you had a cleric who could cast such and such a spell. I wonder where you would have found one of those. Oh, I wonder where it's like, well, I was going to have so-and-so do that. Or they're like, why is this combat so hard? Well, so-and-so was meant to come in and help partway through, and eventually, if I'm able to do that and just sort of like, subtly rub it in their faces enough, they start to realize that, NPCs are worth more than their experience value. And often, even if one of them is somewhat annoying or antagonistic or sometimes looks like they're working at cross purposes, they might be a valuable tool that you don't want to just off because they insulted you once, That's sort of how I try to do that, is by letting it happen and then showing them the consequences so that they'll think of the consequences later. Next question. Go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, and above and beyond that, I mean, even just showing your character, your players that NPCs and people around them have value just there, like this NPC
to the world
has. Well, I mean, even just like part of the social contract we were talking about before is people are valuable to each other, and so these NPCs probably have something that your characters want, and there may be a way to go about it without killing them. And you know what? Part of the game is sometimes there's not. But if you're showing that and making these characters interesting and important to them, then that can help prevent that.
Thank you. Let's do another question.
Yes, this one is from Eric. The things that make people stand out are either physical features or personality traits. Do you find that certain physical features of an NPC get more attention, or do the personality traits draw the players in more?
I don't have any, I never deal with characters who have physical features, so for me it's all personality. So I wouldn't know.
So I'll actually say it is kind of all personality, because a lot of physical features that people have, while we can look at somebody and say, how they look doesn't define them, people choose a lot how they look. And so physical features are a signpost for a character's personality. And sometimes when they're at cross purposes, that makes it more interesting itself. But I mean, if you describe or show a big, beefy character, broad shoulders, everybody's already got an idea of what that person's personality is. And so there is a lot of just crosstalk there. And so it's hard to define which one is more interesting.
I think that's a great point.
I would say in the very short term, especially in a visual medium, look is going to go bang for your buck. It takes about as long to draw a boring person as an interesting one. And if you just need a very short, hey, this person, talk to them and bye, yeah, visual is going to go far. Even in descriptive things, if there's one character who stands out, visually, just how they're described, yeah, that might do something. But if you have a character that's coming back over and over and over again, does not matter how many belts or zippers he has, not going to be as interesting as a character with a solid motivation. And it's a balance. You need something to hook people on, and frankly, to be able to give them a description more than a name, so they have something to picture. On the other hand, you do need meat. You can't just get by on flash.
One of the things that I think is interesting is that you're talking about signposting. In video games, often you use a character's visuals in order to indicate their relative importance to the plot. My mother and I, when we were playing Final Fantasy way back in the day, we used to joke about protagonist hair, that in order for people to merit story time and to see who's going to be important, you can tell by their hair. If they have hair that a normal, reasonable person would wear, they're an uninteresting NPC and you're not meant to interact much with them. If they have crazy hair that would not work in real life, then they're going to fulfill an important story role. So I feel as though the visual is something that gets you hooked in to say, oh, hey, this character is important. It's a signpost saying, pay attention to this character. But then you got to have the personality to back them up, or you end up with that crazy motorcycle guy from the Final Fantasy VII remake, where it's like, why are you taking so much screen time? I don't understand what your purpose is. So can we get one more question?
Yeah, this is another one from James. Do you have any go-to character tropes? What roles do you like them to serve at the table?
That actually brings up an interesting... There are lots of different character tropes that are just really great to bring in. A large portion of voice acting is improv acting, and one of the first things you learn about improv in character work is bringing in those tropes, those people who are just have, everybody has very different personalities, and you can just bring in people people that you know of, famous people, Jack Nicholson, these are the impersonations that I was talking about, just, choose somebody to impersonate. And then just these broad character tropes, everybody kind of knows what a druid generally is like. And then just tweaking those. Mm-hmm. And you definitely, if you're bringing in the tropes, you have to tweak them. Because if it's just the trope on its own, it's flat, it's boring. But there's certain things you can do about their wants, their activities, what they're doing, that can just tweak it and bring some life to it.
Yeah, blending two tropes is always super, super useful. And the nice thing about DMing, especially if you're not DMing professionally, is that you can steal whatever you want. You were talking about League of Legends earlier, and I have a confession to make. Half of the characters, actually more than half of the characters that my younger DM groups are going in, the characters they're interacting with are League of Legends characters that I just ripped out, and sometimes I don't even change the name, but they don't even realize because they're 12-year-old girls and they're never going to play League of Legends, and I'll just twist it to match up with all the different story things, and they love it. It's okay
that
to
does not work in video games.
Don't do video games. Don't do that. But it's okay to steal things if you're
from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And just to very briefly wrap up on mine, I do not have important characters as stock characters because I DM with enough of the same people they will know. However, you would be shocked at how many quests that can get started, resolved, hinted, or completely skipped over by having a neighborhood busybody who just wants someone to talk to. Just someone who's stuck at home and she wants to talk to the players because they happen to be by. it is the fastest way to have someone who has a reason to say too much and then give them the information and get out, and they do not have to pay total attention. They just need to they get the information, they seize on that, they go, this means this, and then you're done. So those kinds of stock characters, I think, are very useful as for your uninteresting NPCs. Give them an understandable motivation and a stock characteristic that makes them not have to think, and they'll start focusing on the plot and the usage, and that's what you need sometimes.
My overused character trope is the pacifist cleric, because often I will have people who do not want to play clerics because they consider healers to be boring, but the game's sort of designed around a certain amount of healing in the party, and so, got to have an NPC cleric. And how do you keep an NPC from outshining the players? Make them not want to do stuff like fight monsters. And so, like the shy, mousy, I don't really want to hurt anyone, but I want to help save the world sort of pacifist cleric that tags along with the players and does nothing in combat but heal once around is probably my overused character trope. Okay, we have 3 minutes left. Let's go through brief outroductions. Just say where people can find you next, say what you've been working on, and where people can buy your stuff. Let's start at the top. Ben.
So my website's under construction right now, but eventually you'll be able to find it again at benjaminpistorius.com. And hopefully pretty soon I'll be able to start telling at some festivals again, and that's where you can find me.
All right. You can find me if you want to hire me. You can go at my services through chapter1editing.com. If you want to catch me and my friends talking about Pokemon and things, the Puckle podcast can be found on every major podcatcher. It's on Spotify. You Google it, you find it. Not the Indian human rights organization that happens to have the same acronym. We're older though, so that's the real fun.
So I work at the Lionsgate Space Center in Saratoga Springs, and if you're in Utah, we just opened up again. So if you're okay with wearing masks, please, and you will be required to wear masks, then you can book missions there. My writing is taking a little bit of a break right now, but I do have one book out called My Brother is Human, and it can be found at dramaticpress.com. And I will also be giving a couple of other presentations in this room. Same time tomorrow, I'll be talking about a random stranger who hacked into our Minecraft server and gave us a big story. So that's what we're... Yeah.
That's fun. What time is that?
That's 11 a.m. tomorrow in this room. So
cool. And you can find my work. Our game was released 9 days ago. It's called Final Winter. It's a dungeon crawler time attack RPG with some heavy story to it as well. I think that we've got 75 different endings and 30 NPCs. It's exciting, and we're really grateful that it's out. My Minecraft mod pack called Blightfall can be found on the Technic launcher. It's been downloaded 2 million times, so you're welcome to check that out too. But it's not monetized
I might have
anymore.
Used it.
So. What?
Okay. I think I might have used it, maybe. But would you be willing to put that link of your video game in the chat? So
yeah, I'll put it in the chat.
Perfect.
And you can find me next 3 o'clock today. I am on the panel that is called, looking it up real fast, Choose Your Audience, How to Build a Game for a Specific Age Group. And thank you so much for coming. We appreciate all of the questions and the support for coming to a gaming panel. I know we're one of the smaller tracks.